I pledge allegiance to the flag Okay, good evening and welcome to Tulsi Gabbard in Enfield. I'm Gary Hutchins. We're hosting here tonight because my wife didn't want 100 people traipsing through our home, so this worked out pretty well. So in the past 50 years that I've been eligible to vote, I've never, ever got involved with politics. It's just not me. And the only exception was I went to see John McCain in 2007. And that was because John McCain was obviously in the military, and I have a military background. Coincidentally, 51 years ago today, I raised my right hand and enlisted in the U.S. Army. Not for the same reasons Tulsi did, but I enlisted for my own reasons. I boarded a bus and went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then later on to Vietnam. That was the original regime change war. So that was my connection. And it's the same for Tulsi tonight. She was a veteran. That's what piqued my interest. I went to her website, and it's like, holy crap. It's like, she's been in public service since she was 21, and she doesn't lie. She enlisted in the Army after 9/11, and she's still a member of the Hawaii National Guard. She's a major. She graduated from accelerated OCS as an honor graduate, first female ever to do it. She's done 2 tours of duty in the Middle East. She doesn't lie. She actually missed one of the DNC debates because she was on her 2-week duty in Indonesia. This woman is dedicated. She's been Congresswoman for 7 years for the state of Hawaii, and she doesn't lie. She surfs. She surfs with veterans in South Carolina, and just last week she went for surfing at Hampton Beach in 39-degree water. Did I mention she's Hawaiian? She's into physical fitness. If you go to YouTube and check out her videos, she's into yoga, and just I sweat. It's just crazy. Last week she did a polar plunge with a father that lost 2 of his sons to the opioid addiction. And again, just dedication. She's knowledgeable, dedicated, and most of all, compassionate. I watched a video of one of her town hall meetings in Epsom, and she had 2 veterans in the front row, and they were crying on her shoulder because of basic treatment with the VA. And she stopped what she was doing to take care of the veterans. And she doesn't lie. This candidate is a real deal. Ladies and gentlemen, the next President of the United States, Tulsi Gabbard.
How about it for Gary Hutchins, please? Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your support. And thank you for helping us find this venue and keeping your wife happy in the process. I really, really appreciate you. We have 2 other volunteers here tonight. How many of you met Anya on your way in at the sign-in table? There she is in the back. Thank you, Anya, for coming and helping, and thanks to your dad for bringing her here. I think she is our youngest volunteer to date. Thank you very much. I want to recognize 2 of your state representatives here tonight. Roger Dontonville, can you stand up, please? Thank you for your service and leadership. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. And Josh Adjutant, State Representative Josh Adjutant, who's also here. He's a fellow veteran. Josh, too, was a young leader elected here when he was 24 years old. How old are you now? Still 24. All right, cool. Thank you for your service, Josh, on so many different levels. And thanks to all of you for coming out. I wasn't sure, coming from Hawaii, when it rains there, people kind of like traffic is slow, like it's so wet, it's so rainy. So when we woke up this morning, where were we staying? In Lebanon, we saw the snow coming down. I wasn't sure how many people would come out and brave the weather, but you're here. So thank you very much. Time is the most precious thing that any one of us has to give. So your choice in coming here this evening to share your time with me means the world. I really appreciate it. I want to start with something that I think is at the core of all of the other issues and challenges maybe you came here concerned about, that you came here thinking about tonight. It's one that is necessary for us as a country to tackle and to deal with so that we can make sure our government is working for us, so that we can make sure that our government is actually focused on solving problems. And that issue is just how divided our country has become. How, unfortunately, we are increasingly in a place where both politicians in Washington and people who I meet in different parts of the country who just feel like there's no way that we can come together as a nation once again. There is no way to heal these divides that exist, divides that are based on hyper-partisanship. Who did you vote for? Who did you vote against? What political affiliation do you identify with? How do you worship? Who do you love? Where do you come from? The color of your skin? All of these things that really represent the diversity of our country, unfortunately being used as wedges to tear us apart. And this is so disheartening and discouraging, because failure is not an option here. Just throwing in the towel and accepting, well, this is the status quo, and Washington will continue to be broken, and they will continue to fail to deliver for the American people, for us, for our kids, our families, our communities, and walking away from the process. This is unacceptable. Abraham Lincoln gave a speech about 161 years ago, warning our country at that time and us today that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And even as we say the Pledge of Allegiance here tonight, in the very beginning of every day that Congress is in session on the House floor, we recite the Pledge of Allegiance in classrooms across the country, at Rotary clubs, in our communities. We gather together, all of us as Americans, with our hand over our hearts, facing this flag, reciting these really powerful words that show us the way forward, reminding us that we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Not just people who are a member of my party, not just people who believe in a certain thing, not just people who choose to take a stand for one thing but not another, people who look like me but not like you. No. Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is the stand that we must take. This is the path forward for us as we strive towards that more perfect union, as we strive towards that vision for our country that our founders had for us. And I had heard many times about this speech that Abraham Lincoln gave about a house divided against itself cannot stand. Powerful words. I went back and kind of went and read through the whole speech, and I was really struck with how he chose to end it, how he closed that speech. He said, "We shall not fail. If we stand strong, we shall not fail." Failure is not an option for us. There is so much at stake. Those whom we love, who we care about, this country that we love, even with all of our own imperfections, this country that we love and the freedoms and the principles enshrined in our Constitution. These are the things that bind us all together. And this is how we, the people, can begin to heal these divides, can begin to come together, to treat each other with respect. recognizing that, sure, we'll agree on some things, we'll disagree on others. Maybe we'll disagree on a lot of things. But if we are coming together, sharing that common ground, that common space, that we come at our core from the same place of motivation, of working for the best interests of our country and our people, then we can make progress towards that future of liberty and justice for all. So how does this happen? How does this look in a very practical way? It begins with respect, what we in Hawaii call aloha. There's a reason why how many of you have been to Hawaii before? All right, wow, about half of you. That's awesome. But when you go to Hawaii, right, one of the first things you see in the airport, there's a big sign that says aloha. You're greeted with aloha. When you talk to people, you go into the local shops. People might yell out to you, aloha, as you come in or as you're leaving. It's not because it means hello. It does not mean goodbye. But we greet each other with this word really because of the powerful meaning that it is. That no matter who you are or where you come from or who you voted for or the color of your skin, that aloha says, I see you for who you are. That I come to you with respect, with an open heart, recognizing we are all God's children. We are all brothers and sisters. We are all connected. And therefore inspiring us to see each other beyond a lot of these superficial labels and boxes that we are in, or someone places us in. And it's this power of aloha that gives us that ability, once again, to stand in that common space and to get beyond the divisions and to be able to make progress, to be that change that we need to see. So I was confronted in a very practical way of how to bring this aloha to Washington. Grateful to have grown up in Hawaii, the most diverse state in the nation, that in some places, all of this diversity, people from all over the world speaking different languages, that might be a reason for violence or bigotry or discrimination or divides, but in Hawaii, it's not. It's not. And it's this culture of aloha that's the reason why. And so being elected to Congress, 2012, freshman Democrat coming into a Republican majority in Congress, I knew a few people, but not many. And I had to think very quickly about how I would be able to best serve my constituents in Hawaii, given there was a Republican majority. And this hyper-partisan divide would have to be bridged in order to be able to pass legislation, in order to be able to deliver for my constituents, really deliver results for them. And so as I was there and I started to think about how best to do that, how best to introduce myself to my new colleagues, I started with the most universal language of all, which is food. Genius, right? My mother, I'm the fourth of 5 kids. Mom and dad still live in Hawaii. And I called home and asked my mom if she would make 434 boxes of her famous macadamia nut toffee. A gift of aloha for every one of my colleagues and soon-to-be new friends. And she thought it was a great idea. And I said, wait, I'm not done. I have one more favor to ask. And I asked if she would make another 435 larger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress. I worked for a few years between my 2 Middle East deployments as a legislative aide for a U.S. Senator from Hawaii who was the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee at that time. And whether it's in Congress or in a business or anywhere, we all know how important it is to support our team. And she paused in response only as she was thinking about how much longer it would take her to do this, but she said, okay, good, I'm all in, we'll make it happen. So she started making the toffee, she stirred in 2 pots at the same time. My dad was the self-appointed quality control guy, and he took 1 slice out of every single pan that she poured. No joke. If she tried to get one by him, he wasn't having it, had to make sure it was perfect. And it was. But as they were doing that, I was in DC and I just started handwriting personal notes to every one of my new colleagues. In this age of texting and email, you know, handwritten notes still makes a statement. And I signed every one of those notes just saying, I look forward to serving alongside you. Started to deliver these little gifts of aloha and quickly got responses that when I was on the House floor, the only time that we're really all in the same place at the same time, members of Congress from other committees, other parts of the country, chairmen of powerful committees, people I normally would not be interacting with just weeks into my first term in Congress, came and they started to find me on the House floor and saying thank you. Many of them saying, I ate all the candy, I need more before I can go home this weekend for my family. And then most importantly, just asking me, say, tell me what's going on in Hawaii. Tell me, what are the issues that your constituents are concerned about? Let's work together. Let's find a way to get something done. That simple gesture, person to person, based on respect, laid that foundation to begin to open those doors that were really probably closed, perhaps even locked, on my getting to Congress to create that opportunity to work together. And these relationships have continued throughout my time in Congress, now going on over 7 years. First 6 years of which were with the Republican majority, when people said it would be impossible as a Democrat to get legislation passed. It was those relationships that began based on aloha, based on respect, that allowed me to pass my very first bill into law in record period of time, that allowed me to introduce and pass what some said were controversial pieces of legislation, amendments to important bills that people said was dead on arrival. Well, I passed those provisions because when I called my colleagues to ask for their support, I got those calls returned. I got those text messages returned. That having those conversations in the halls, making the pitch for why my legislation on Native Hawaiian education was important, that my colleagues knew I wasn't going to lie to them, that they could trust that what I was telling them was true, and they could then make the decision about whether or not to support my legislation based on the substance, based on the merits. Sometimes some of my colleagues said, okay, I hear you, but I'm not going to support your bill. Maybe next time. But there were many more times and many more people who heard me out and said, yeah, you know what, that makes sense. They told me, my boss or the party leadership told me to vote against it, but I'm going to stand with you. I'm going to vote for this because it just makes sense. This is how it should be in Washington. That bills shouldn't be, the outcome of legislation shouldn't be predetermined based on what letter is next to the introducer or the sponsor of that legislation. That every single member of Congress, whether Democrat or Republican, should be coming in and looking at the substance of each bill that's introduced or that's coming to the House floor for a vote and making their vote based on what is in the best interest of the people of our country. Having a vigorous debate and dialogue about the pros and cons of that legislation, improving it, strengthening it, passing amendments to that legislation to do so. But that's not what we have. And this is at the heart of what needs to change so that we can reform our healthcare system, so that we can reform our immigration system. We can fix our broken criminal justice system. We can do what's necessary to protect our environment. Make sure we have clean water to drink. Make sure we have clean air to breathe. Make sure that we are improving our education system by providing our teachers and our kids in the classrooms with what they need to be successful. These are all objectives and goals that I think we'll find more agreement on than not. We may disagree with the steps that need to be taken and how we get there, which is okay. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We should welcome the opportunity to have this dialogue, because without it, then we will never be able to move forward as a country, as a people. We will never get to the place of solving problems if all we are doing is hunkering down in our corner with our team, saying, hey, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. That's not how this system works. And it's this tribalism and this divisiveness that we must overcome, and the only way to do that is if we, the people, choose to make it so. It's not going to happen magically. There's a lot of folks in Washington who are more concerned about preserving their own power or serving one special interest or another than they are about actually solving problems and serving the people. So when the founders wrote into the Constitution those first 3 words, we the people, it was a reminder to us about who's in charge. We the people come first. We the people get to determine who we hire and fire. And it's a reminder to those who we hire, who they are supposed to be serving. That if we have leaders who are coming together across the country, across party lines, coming together, solely focused on that mission and that purpose of service to our country and to our people, then we have the opportunity, working side by side, to usher in a new era of leadership and a new era of positive change for this great country, so that those who come after us will have greater opportunity and a brighter future than the many who are struggling in this country just to survive today. Before we start our conversation here, I want you to start thinking about what questions or ideas you want to share tonight, but I want to bring up something that's in the news. Who's paying attention to what's happening with Iran? Just about all of you. Good. Good. The implications of the decisions that this president has made as commander-in-chief are very serious and far-reaching. Our commander-in-chief should be making decisions based on what is in the best national security interests of our country, based on the safety and security of the American people. And this president, who lacks experience and understanding in foreign policy and national security, has committed an act of war and pushed us as a nation into war with Iran, undermining our national security interests in 2 very serious ways. Number 1, beginning with Trump's withdrawing from the Iran nuclear agreement and the many steps of escalation in that conflict that have happened since, to include designating Iran's military as a terrorist organization, something that's never happened before by any country in history. Instituting crippling sanctions, this modern-day siege against Iran and the Iranian people, sending more and more troops to the region, further escalating these tensions and this crisis, and culminating with what we just saw the other day, with taking out Iran's top military commander. Iran announced, I think today or yesterday, that they are no longer abiding by any restrictions within the Iran nuclear agreement, which means every day that goes by, Iran is getting closer to achieving a nuclear weapons capability, putting us and the world at risk. The second way that this is undermining our national security is that it is allowing ISIS and Al-Qaeda to strengthen and reconstitute themselves, further putting us and people in the region at risk. Our commander in Iraq just announced that our troops who are in Iraq and Syria, for that matter, but specifically in Iraq, they're there to try to prevent, to work with Iraqi forces and some of the Iranian and Shia militias to try to prevent ISIS and Al-Qaeda from reconstituting their power. Our U.S. commander in Iraq made the announcement today saying that all of our troops will no longer be conducting that mission because now they must fully commit their resources and their efforts towards defending against the Iranian and Shia militia threat that exists. So the very same people with which we have had an alliance with, and it has been an uneasy alliance between U.S. forces, Iranian and Shia forces, Iraqi forces, and Kurdish forces, all coming together with the common focus of defeating and preventing a resurgence of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, is now broken. Our troops now focused on defending against the Iranian and Shia militia. Iranian and Shia militia now focused on our troops. So where does that leave ISIS and Al-Qaeda? In a position of strength to start putting things back together, to create and mount this resurgence. We need a commander-in-chief who has foresight and who will make decisions not based on whether someone is a bad guy or a dictator is a bad guy, but is making decisions based on our national security interests, understanding the consequences of these actions. This is why the decision that you have before you as voters here in New Hampshire, as first in the nation, is so critical. We're seeing the consequence of what happens with a commander-in-chief who doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And the more this situation, the more this war with Iran is allowed to escalate, we will find ourselves in yet another endless quagmire with Iran, and a war that will prove to be far more costly than anything we saw with the Iraq war, than anything we saw with the Afghanistan war. Wars that we're still paying for now, almost 20 years later. I'm the only candidate running for president that served in uniform in Iraq in 2005 during the height of the war. I understand very clearly what is happening there, the complexities of that situation. I bring that experience, coupled with the experience that I've had in Congress now for over 7 years, serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, meeting with world leaders, serving on the Armed Services Committee, working with military commands and exercising oversight over the Department of Defense, bringing our generals in to ask the tough questions about the decisions that are being made and the consequences of those decisions. I bring that experience and that understanding in national security and foreign policy, prepared to serve you as Commander-in-Chief, where I will make sure that we are ending these long-standing regime change wars, de-escalating tensions in this situation specifically with Iran, by doing what it takes to get them and us back into this Iran nuclear agreement, ending the escalating sanctions that have unfortunately increased the tensions and the problem there, and get us back on track towards diplomacy, understanding that the only alternative to diplomacy is war. We are facing a greater risk of nuclear catastrophe now than before. Nuclear strategists are sounding their alarm bells, both because of what's happening now with Iran, as well as escalating tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China. As Commander-in-Chief, I will pursue all tools of diplomacy to start to de-escalate these tensions with other nuclear-armed countries, work to end this new nuclear arms race, and instead redirect our taxpayer dollars that we've seen wasted for so long towards actually serving the needs of our people here at home. We have $4 billion every month coming out of our pockets just to pay for what's going on in Afghanistan. $4 billion a month. What's the one of our state representatives here can tell us, what's your annual budget here for New Hampshire? Roughly. 16 billion. So a few months in Afghanistan, 4 months in Afghanistan can take care of your annual budget here. $5.5 million per hour is what that comes out to, what we're paying for in Afghanistan, to go line the pockets of corrupt politicians, line the pockets of big defense contractors who are making a bunch of money off of our continued presence there. And for what? For how much longer? What are we trying to accomplish? These documents that were released from the Pentagon recently told us very directly that even our generals are scratching their heads wondering, what are we doing this for? What does quote unquote winning look like? When do we actually get to pull out, bring our troops home, and stop sending our money to Afghanistan and instead keep it right here at home? Foreign policy is domestic policy. And as you consider your vote and who you plan to cast that vote for on February 11th here in New Hampshire, I ask you to consider these serious implications about who is best qualified to serve you and make the right decisions, exercise good judgment related to our national security and our foreign policy. I am uniquely equipped to fulfill that responsibility as Commander-in-Chief, bringing that experience that I have to make those decisions that put our national security, the safety and security of our people at the forefront, not thinking about how we can better serve the interests of another country or the military-industrial complex, but actually putting the interests of our country first. If you agree with this leadership that I'm talking about, I'm inviting you here tonight to join us, to join our people-powered campaign that we take no money from PACs or lobbyists or corporations. We are a people-powered movement focused on really bringing about this vision that our founders had, a government of, by, and for the people, a government that is focused every single day on serving you. Thank you very much for hearing me, listening, and for taking the time to be here tonight. Thank you very much. We've got a couple of microphones that are floating around here. Here we go. Gary's got one. I'd like to invite you if you want to ask a question, and as you do so, it would be great if you would introduce yourself and also maybe share something about what kind of change you personally care most about that you would like to see happen in our country. Sure. We've got a shy crowd tonight.
I'm Samuel Swenson.
Nice
and
to
I
see
live
you.
About 3 miles here in Enfield. And the change that I would like to see is the infighting between in the government. Just because they're of a different party, I would like to see that to stop. Okay. And well, you touched on a lot of what I was going to ask you about. But because of Trump's reckless actions in foreign policy, continuing the failed regime change we have seen for years, you have talked about renegotiating the Iran nuclear deal and changing and adding new things to what was in the previous. I was curious to what those changes were going to be.
Okay. Thank you, Seamus. That's a good question. Look, I think as we were leading up to the vote and the finalizing of those negotiations of the Iran nuclear agreement under the Obama administration, there was a lot of dialogue and conversation that we in Congress had with Mr. Munoz, who was one of the lead negotiators, as well as then Secretary Kerry, about how things were going, the concerns that we had about some of the flaws we saw in the deal, then working to see how we could strengthen it. And ultimately, when that vote came before us in the House of Representatives, I think there were many of us that continued to have some concerns about what was maybe left out of the deal or things that should have been strengthened, specifically related to the sunset provisions that were in the deal, as well as meaning certain things that were expiring by a certain date when Iran could potentially then resume their nuclear program, as well as the fact that their missile program was really not addressed at all. Those were two main areas that I saw problematic that I thought then, as I think now, should be addressed in a parallel negotiated fashion to try to strengthen this agreement. But what it came down for me was when that vote was coming before us, it was a choice between diplomacy or war. And that deal, even with its imperfections, was better than dealing with an Iran that was literally weeks away from having a nuclear weapon capability which would really bring to the forefront the question of war before Congress. I think that's what's so important, unfortunately, that's been lost, is that we hear from politicians so often about, well, we should just go bomb this country or go take out that dictator or go and put sanctions on this country to punish them, rather than really seeing that the United States should be a force for good in the world. And that we should be in a position where we lead with cooperation rather than conflict. Sometimes, unfortunately, people mistake my foreign policy, people in Washington especially, they assume that my call to end regime change wars equals isolationism, which is really sad. When I first started getting this, I couldn't figure it out, but then I got, gosh, people really believe that bombing another country or overthrowing a dictator or enacting this modern day siege of sanctions is really the only way we can relate with countries. Because if we're not doing that, then obviously you're an isolationist, right? That's terrible. That's terrible. We should and we must be a force for good in the world. We should be strengthening alliances and partnerships with other countries, recognizing that even if there are areas of difference, serious concern, that we can and must focus on diplomatically negotiating new terms of treaties or new agreements, bringing up security concerns with other countries, while also leaving the door open to be able to build and strengthen partnerships around areas of shared and common interest. And there are many. This is the kind of leadership that I would bring as president, recognizing that we must have a strong and capable military, ready to fulfill its mission of protecting the safety and security of our country. And we must lead with a foreign policy that focuses on diplomacy, leaving war as a final and last resort to protect the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. This is how I will lead as President Commander-in-Chief.
Ms. Gabbard, thank you very much. You're a breath of fresh air.
Thank you.
I'm Scott, and I'm from this area. And I have some questions. I'm hoping that you can help convince some of us who may have voted for the other party that you currently have aligned with. So if we can just focus more on domestic issues. Sure. So foreign policy is very important because it detracts from the resources we have to spend domestically.
Right.
However, really what's a premier issue that's driving the foreign conflicts is we're a debt-based economy. Yeah. We're relying on the petrodollar as being the only way that most countries can buy oil. It has to be through dollars, not their own currency. So we have to prop it up through organizations that do strategies, such as the Council of Foreign Relations, of which you're a member. It's on your website, and you've been on their roster. So the problem with the Council of Foreign Relations is they're an organization that works the strategy to ensure that America and other large G7 countries remain dominant. Could you also tell us how we can reconcile the fact that you've hitched your wagon to a party that, although we can trust you, had said with regards to Obamacare, that we have to pass the bill to know what's in the bill. And that individual who said that 10 years ago is still currently in office, even though they're 80. So how in the world can we believe these promises about having national health care and that the savings from war and defense will pay for it when our neighbors in Canada have a 55% income tax, plus they have a VAT tax, sales tax of 11%. When you go to Europe, it's 60% income tax and a VAT tax of up to 25%. In New Hampshire, I don't think any of us have an appetite for a sales tax. Most of us wouldn't. I don't think it would really square well to take another 5% or more out of our pockets, plus invoke an income tax. You can't tax yourself to prosperity. So how is it that you're able to hitch your wagon to this party that is tax and spend and has always been, and somehow you're going to grow prosperity and ask us to trust you?
Thank you, Scott. You brought up a few different major issues here. I'll start with the Council on Foreign Relations. When I first came to Congress, I joined the Foreign Affairs Committee and became a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations as a way to get plugged in and to be involved with that foreign affairs community in Washington. I am no longer a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and have found, even during my time there, look, if you listen to anything that I've saying and pay attention to what I've done throughout my 7 years in Congress, nothing's changed at any point. I'm not saying what I'm saying just because I'm running for president and trying to get your vote and your support. The consistency of my independent thinking, of calling things straight as they are, whether it is calling out leaders in my own party or calling out this current president and his administration. I have been consistent throughout my years in Congress. So it's not really asking you to listen to what I'm saying at this moment. It's really looking at the record that I have, that whether I was a member of CFR previously or people who I've met with or people who I work with, I am my own person. I always have been. And I'm not running to be a follower of my party or any organization. I'm asking for your trust in my leadership to be able to bring about the kind of change in our government and in my party that I believe that we need to see. I've been very outspoken in saying, hey, there are issues within my own party that need to be addressed. My party was once a party of peace. Now it's hard to distinguish between both Democrat and Republican parties, even as the power has shifted from one administration to the next. We see two very strong similarities. One is that there is really one party, which is a warmongering party that benefits the military-industrial complex. And number two is leaders across both parties don't really give a crap about the escalation of debt that we are finding our country in. So it's not about party politics for me. It never has been. For me, for my political party that I've been a member of since I was 20 or 21 years old and I first ran for state house in Hawaii, it's about fighting for the soul of my party, which to me says it's a party that speaks for the voiceless, that really is a champion for the people who are struggling and suffering every single day in this country. But it's that same kind of leadership that we need to bring to our government across party lines, that we are not digging our country deeper and deeper into debt, that we are not writing blank checks to any special interests or corporations or to fund new wasteful regime change wars. It's about really looking hard at every decision that's made and saying, hey, is this something that's working in the best interest of our country or not? And that's how throughout my time in Congress, and I have looked at different issues, and that's the lens with which I will make decisions as president. That's the way that I will make decisions about who serves in my cabinet, about the kinds of people who are working in these positions of power and influence, not based on party or partisan interests, but people who bring a diversity of ideas and experience to the forefront, who are connected by one most important qualification, that they are there to serve. They are not there to go and serve for a few years and then go make a whole bunch of money by becoming a lobbyist on K Street in Washington. People who are there to actually serve. There's a lot of different ideas on how we can deal with the crony capitalism within our economy right now that allows, you mentioned healthcare, that allows within our current healthcare system, big insurance and big pharma to exploit us, to make massive profits on the backs of sick people, to price gouge people who are dependent on life-saving medication, increasing prices by thousands and thousands of %. And unfortunately, it's legal corruption, most of them, that they're doing this, that Amazon gets away with paying 0 taxes while I come from a family of small business owners who are the backbone of our economy, who are working hard every day and creating jobs, are struggling just to keep the lights on and the doors open, and who are paying their taxes every year. This system is so unbalanced and unfairly weighted to favor that powerful elite who can afford to have those lobbyists who have found favor with politicians in power across both party lines so they can pass legislation that benefits their bottom line to the detriment of the people in our country. I am one of only a handful of members of Congress who has co-sponsored legislation to support an audit of the Federal Reserve, recognizing that that entity has an incredible impact on our monetary policy, for better or for worse. And the lack of transparency for all of us in the decision-making process that they have is putting us all in a more and more precarious position, where even as our economy, the numbers are trending good, we're moving in the right direction, GDP is good, stocks are going up, unemployment numbers are down. I'm hearing from friends of mine who are economists or people who worked in the financial industry, they're seeing a lot of the same signs that they were seeing prior to the 2008 crash. Only what they're seeing is potentially even worse. So once again, it's stepping outside of the groupthink in Washington that rises above party lines and providing the kind of courage and leadership to do the right thing for the people, to do the right thing for our country. I am no stranger to political attacks, to name calling, to people. You're laughing, sir. I think you're familiar with. Maybe you've seen some of this stuff. People have asked me. Where was I? In Concord the other day, and a guy came up to me. We just finished eating lunch. He's like, "Tulsi, how do you do it? They call you all these names. They accuse you of all these things, all these baseless attacks. Like, how do you keep your head up? How do you keep fighting every day?" And it's because it's not about me. It's not about me. This is about fighting for the country that I love. Just as I have in uniform, it's fulfilling that commitment to serve. It's about getting up every day and fighting to make sure that our veterans are honored and able to get the care that they need when they come home. It's about making sure that those who are struggling every single day are having their voices heard and their interests represented in our government. That we are bringing the diverse ideas for how we solve these perennial problems together so that we can actually come to a solution that serves all Americans. None of these problems have easy answers. I don't claim to have them all myself, but I do know that I have the experience and the leadership that is necessary to begin to heal these divides and start to bring our country together so that our people can be served. Thank you for your question, Scott.
Tim Jennings, I live in the area.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Tim.
I'd like to call you Tulsi, but I'd
Please
really
do.
rather call you Madam President. It's probably the closest I'll ever get to actual president, so thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, what I'm concerned about is what has developed over the past 3 or 4 presidencies is sort of the imperial presidency. Mm-hmm. For instance, why is it that the president gets to decide who can immigrate to this country? It's a power that, to me, needs to reside with Congress, and not one person. How is it that the president can unilaterally impose tariffs worldwide? That seems a power that our president in the United States should not have. So my question to you, Ms. Gabbard, is what would you be willing to give up, powers that the president currently has?
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. This is a really important question for a few reasons. One is, and I'll just add another to the 2 examples that you gave, because it's one we're confronted with now and that we've seen in previous administrations, and that is a president that ignores Congress's constitutional authority to decide whether or not to declare war, and instead begins waging a presidential war. I've introduced legislation in Congress called the No More Presidential Wars resolution. I introduced it in the last Congress with a Republican colleague of mine named Walter Jones, who represented North Carolina for decades, and who was a strong voice where we disagreed on some other things, but He was a strong voice for ending presidential wars, respecting the Constitution, and ending these regime change wars. We've reintroduced that in this Congress to ensure that both the president and Congress fulfills their respective constitutional responsibilities. I think the other reason why this question is so important about abuse of executive authority is some of the things that we're hearing in this primary campaign, this Democratic primary campaign, where some of the other candidates have stood there and give speech after speech saying, well, hey, if Congress doesn't do X, I'm going to do it. If Congress doesn't pass this legislation within the first 100 days, I'm going to do it, which is no different from the very same abuse of authority through executive order that many of us have criticized this president for doing, further perpetuating this same problem. So, you know, I haven't gone through and kind of made a list of what are all those different areas, but I think fundamentally it's getting back to the Constitution and recognizing what authorities are delivered to the executive branch and the president to fulfill, and what authorities Congress very clearly has to fulfill, and building those relationships to work with Congress to pass legislation to get things done. It is something that makes headlines in Washington now. Anytime leaders from Congress are invited to go to the White House and meet with the president, both under this administration and the last one, because it hardly ever happens. It hardly ever happens. How, in your own lives, you know, in your work or at home with your family, how would you resolve conflict or problems or questions? How do you get things done if you're not willing to talk to each other? Or if you only talk to each other through Twitter or by sending a memo? Nothing would happen. And this is part of the problem. This is exactly part of the problem. So just like I did in Congress, I would do the same thing as president, to invite leaders from Congress to come to the White House, not only once when I'm first elected, but on a regular basis, at least once a month, to have this regular and ongoing conversation away from the cameras, away from the lights, away from negotiations by tweet, and actually be able to start talking about what are the priorities and how are we going to get together to make things happen, to actually respect the way that our founders set up this system of governance, where it is deliberate, frustratingly slow sometimes, but it requires this collaboration, this working together to actually be able to deliver results for people that are not just dependent on the decisions or the whims of one individual. That is exactly what the founders of our country escaped from when they came and founded this country. And so that's where my decision-making process would be rooted.
We have time. We have time for just one more question, please.
Hello, my name is Eric Shori. And so this is a question about healthcare policy. A lot of the candidates are talking about it, but speaking as someone who during the Obamacare debate actually read a draft when it was, the whole draft, when it was 1,800 some odd pages. People talk about healthcare, but they talk about insurance, which is a financial service. It's maybe uniquely American to think that financial services will cure illness and injury. And there's also a lot of talk about medical services, billing, and that sort of stuff. But in order for there to be a serious, workable healthcare policy, I'd like to hear about things like agricultural policy, where we're gearing towards overproduction of crops that result in the cheapest, most plentiful food ingredients in America being basically fat, sugar, and refined starches. And you combine that with an economy where a lot of people have to buy the cheapest possible food, and then we wonder why we have these problems with things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, lifelong, expensive to treat medical conditions, and we figure we'll change the billing and somehow magically this will make things okay.
Thank you, Herrick. You are speaking my language. That is, I mean, look, I don't want to repeat what you've said because you've stated what I think is such an integral problem with it's bigger than just a healthcare system, because it's hard to call it a healthcare system when it's really a sick care system. It's not focused in any way on that kind of preventive health and wellness, taking a holistic approach to being able to try to make sure we're preventing these sicknesses and sometimes these lifelong illnesses from occurring in the first place, which really are driving up the cost of our healthcare in this country tremendously. I'm grateful. I grew up in a family that was really focused on like eating healthy and getting exercise. Gary talked a little bit about that exercise. That was really the military drilled that into me more than anything else. But just trying to be healthy rather than just waiting until you're sick and then seeing what kind of drugs can you take to treat that sickness. And so the things that I grew up with, some of my friends did not. And I've got some friends in Hawaii. Hawaii also has a huge problem with diabetes for those same reasons. Highly processed foods, high fat, high sugars, so on and so forth. And some of my friends grew up thinking that they were eating salad every day when their salad did not contain any vegetables. They grew up eating macaroni salad. And that was, I got my macaroni salad, I got my rice, and I got my meat. And that's the average lunch. So a huge part of this is both the supply, but also the information and awareness. Another point as we talk about how we can really make sure our healthcare system is about health care is about making sure that our doctors, as they're going through medical school, are required to take real nutrition training. I was shocked and astounded when a few years ago I learned, visiting a medical school, that doctors are not required to have any nutrition training, maybe a couple of hours. But that when people are coming in with these different illnesses and sicknesses and what do I do, that they're not looking at this from like, okay, well, what are you eating? What's your diet like? Here are some suggestions and some changes that you can consider and how to make to prevent this problem from getting worse, or to actually see food as medicine. We have to get to the fundamental core of these issues if we are really serious about taking care of the health and well-being of our people. Things like acupuncture, things like other alternative forms of treatment, things like medical marijuana. I've got the only bipartisan bill in Congress that would end the federal marijuana prohibition, leaving it up to those who, if they're dealing with chronic pain or illness or need treatment of some sort, that they have that option, that avenue available to them. Unfortunately, we don't have these things, both through the Farm Bill and taking the agriculture approach that you're talking about, as well as through our healthcare policy, because once again, in this pay-to-play culture in Washington, you have big pharma that spends more money on PACs and lobbyists in Washington than they do on television commercials. How many of those commercials do you see if you watch TV? A lot, a lot. They spend more on PACs and lobbyists than they do on their ad campaigns. Obviously, big insurance, huge amount of influence. And if you read that legislation, I wasn't in Congress when it passed, but I was told the earlier versions of the bill were actually good. And then we started to see that the bill got watered down, it got watered down, it got watered down, and by the end of it, this prohibition of Medicare to negotiate lower prescription drug prices was somehow slid back into the bill when it wasn't in there in the beginning. How does that happen? It's not because the AARP went to their members of Congress and demanded that our government not be allowed to negotiate lower prescription drug prices. No, it's the other way around. AARP has a campaign now saying stop the greed, because big pharma and their lobbyists got their hands on that bill and said, hey, you guys got to put this this prohibition back in, knowing that our government, therefore us, we are the largest purchaser of prescription drugs in the world. In the world. So imagine what kind of leverage we would have if our government was allowed under our laws to negotiate lower prescription drug prices. In order to bring about this systemic change that we must to ensure the health and well-being of our people, we've got to get to this corruption that sits at the heart of the rot we see in our government. And we, the people, are the only ones who can do that. It's not going to happen because somebody in Washington says, oh, okay, you know what, I think what we've been doing is wrong. It's a self-perpetuating system of power that feeds off of each other, and the people get left behind. Once again, and this is a good note to close on because it's directly connected to all of these other issues about how we need to get this corruption out of our government. And we, the people, are the only ones who can make that happen, to raise those expectations that we have on our leaders, to stop taking PAC and lobbyist money. Pass legislation that says members of Congress and senior staffers in our government are not allowed to go and become lobbyists. That if you choose to serve, just like our teachers do, just like our military does, just like law enforcement, just like social workers, people who choose to serve are doing it because of a desire to serve. Not because, okay, if I go and I serve a few years, make a lot of connections, get a lot of influence in Washington, then I can go peddle that on K Street where all the lobbyists hang out and make a bunch of money. That's what we have right now. I've seen it over and over and over again. We've got to close this revolving door that exists on Capitol Hill, but also exists in the SEC, exists within the FCC, the FDA, the CDC, go down the laundry list of acronyms within our government, where we have people going in, either coming from industry and then going in and being in a position to regulate that very same industry, or people who are coming in and then leaving and getting a big payout, working in the industry they were supposed to be providing oversight over on behalf of us as consumers. Leaders who will put the best interest of the American people first and foremost, without exception, is the future that we need for our country. And all of us, all of you are the ones who can make this happen. On that note, I want to invite Gary up. He's going to share a couple of words about what we are doing here over the next 36 days in New Hampshire as we head up to your election, and how we want to invite you to come and join the fun.
Okay, so there's going to be pledge cards basically available out back, and it's basically a commitment card. Will you support Tulsi? It can be anything. Doesn't mean you have to give her $1 million. She has no secret wine cellar meetings to raise money.
Nope.
It's through all small donations. Like she said, no PAC money or anything else. She just needs people to help. If you want a sign to put in your yard, you can get one up back before you leave tonight. It's all these just little small movements that add up. And all we want is just a name that we can contact you with, and you can put down what you want to do or not do. But she needs your help. The mainstream media doesn't seem to want to say anything about her. So it's got to be people-powered. So.
Thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate it. So I would like to leave you with 3 action steps here tonight. Number 1, if you have decided that you want to join our campaign, that's awesome. If you haven't and you're still thinking about what you want to do on Election Day, in both situations, I'd like to ask you to think of 5 people in your life to talk to about what we've talked about here tonight, and start this conversation to make sure that we have an informed population of people who are going in and voting on Election Day. The second thing I'd like to ask you to do, once again, if you appreciate these issues and their importance and you'd like to see more of this message getting out, please consider contributing $5 or whatever you can to our campaign, because it is a people-powered campaign and we need help to be able to continue to get our message out. The third thing is Election Day on February 11th. Whether you are a Democrat, an independent, or libertarian, or Republican that's gone undeclared, so you can make some choices in the primary. Just remember that you can go and you can choose to pull a Democrat ballot and cast your vote for me. The very last, but really the most important thing is that we have some of my mother's macadamia nut toffee here tonight. So as you drop off your pledge cards, or you grab your shirts, or whatever you need at the table, you can see Anya there in the back to take a piece of Mom's macadamia nut toffee home with you tonight. Thank you again for being here. I really appreciate you all. Have a wonderful night, and aloha. Thank you. If you'd like to come up